Alright, section 6. Crankshaft assembly, accessory drive gear train, crankshaft description, inspection, installation, main bearings, description, scheduling, renewal, inspection, removal, application, thrust, collar, description, maintenance, gear type, torsional damper, description, maintenance, accessory drive gear, description, maintenance, accessory drive gear, description, maintenance, governor drive gear, and stub shaft description, maintenance, installation, accessory drive housing, application, alignment, ring gear and coupling disc description, maintenance, accessory drive coupling description, maintenance, service data reference, specification, equipment test list. Alright, your electric motive, GM electric motive engine maintenance manual, the 645, section 6, crankshaft assembly, accessory drive gear train. Alright, your crankshaft assembly with the crankshaft with the main bearing caps of the thrust collar, torsional damper, and accessory drive gear. Although accessory drive gear is part of the crankshaft assembly, it will be described as part of the accessory drive gear train. The accessory drive gear train provides power from the crankshaft to drive the oil pump, the water pumps, and the governor. The crankshaft description of the crankshaft figure 6.1 with the drop forging with the carbon steel material with the induction hard main with the crank pin journals on figure 8 to 12 cylinder engine with the crankshaft with one piece of forging on. 16 and 20 cylinder with the crankshaft is made up with a two-section flange with the bolt tip with the gave with the common bores provided with the gave with the stable operation. All crankshaft dynamically balanced. Short oil passage provide lubrication on the main bearings shown in figure 562. Crankshaft on the mold accessory drive stub shafts available in 12, 16, 20 cylinder engines. For accessory drive gear with the removal of the installation stub shaft. Maintenance inspection. Whether the main connection rod bearings are removed with the crankshaft journal should be inspected, checked for the scoring cracks and signs of distress. And this shows the accessory drive gears, the camshaft gear end, 8-cylinder, 12-cylinder, 16-cylinder, 8 and 20-cylinder. Shows the main bearing, your connection rods, and then your main bearing crankshaft. When generally evidence of the first bearing with the crankshaft is removed of the engine, but it should be visually dimensionally inspected with the Magnaflux inspected if possible. Journal the crankshaft with lubrication hardened with excessive heating resulting in a lack of lubrication, insufficient bearing clearance for the other causes will easily be reduced thermal crackings on the journal. Damaged crankshaft can be easily reconditioned. Electric motor division reestablished the journal side with the recondition condition to use standard size bearing. In some instances, the crankshaft may have the grounding requirement of the use of the undersized bearing. Attempts of grinding crankshaft with the field with proven the unsuccessful during the regrinding process. The depth of the induction of the hardening zone must be checked with the necessary reharden. They require special induction hardening equipment. It is therefore recommended with the crankshaft to be returned with the grinding identification reground crankshaft with the undersized journals of the overside of the thrust bearings will have information stamped on the same check with the serial number. Installation of all main bearings with the A-frame boards with the bearing caps lining up with the bearing tangs. Note, see the main bearings of the qualification of the bearings, inspect with the crankshaft, and be sure with the clean oil of the crankshaft journal with the main bearings shelved with the cleaning oil, and place the thrust collars in the respective A-frame with the counterbore shown figure 6.3. Place the crankshaft with the A-frame bearing with applied with the two end with the two center with the 16 and 20 cylinder bearing caps to hold the crankshaft and place the check with the stud, the nut seal of the washer, lubricated with the Texaco Threadex number 2303. Secure the cap of the tighten the nuts until the contact with the bearings. Remove the hoist with the crane hooks. Apply with the remaining bearing shells and caps. Manually tighten with the nuts and using the hardening washer. See with the bearing cap. They're using the power wrench and all nuts of the 350 to 400 foot-pounds. After all nuts have been tightened to this torque, all the final torque nuts are at 750 foot-pounds. Do not over-torque. Not one nut any one cap should be torqued over 750 foot-pounds until all nuts on the cap have been torqued to 350 to 400 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, 6.3 shows you applying the thrust collars, 16 and 20 cylinder main bearings. Main bearing shells, appreciation type of the steel is backed with the lead bonds, with a thin layer with the lead tin with the bearings located with the power axle with the position with the power, preventing bearing turning up or low, or bearing shell shafts are not interchangeable. So you have your main bearing shell and cap. Lower bearing shells have the two tangs on each side with the fitting of the main bearing cap. The upper main bearing of the shaft with the one tang with the fitting with a groove on the right side with the A-frame bore. Upper shells can be rotated with the direction opposite with the normal. The crankshaft with the rotation lower bearing and the cap removed. Maintenance, schedule running renewal. Lower main bearings should be renewed at intervals specified by the scheduled maintenance program of the upper main bearings are need not to be removed. The lower main bearings are renewed unless the lower bearings should show definite sign of distress. Upper main bearings may be changed out individually as required, not in sets. Inspection upper main bearings. Inspection upper main bearings is not recommended. However, the ones for the upper main bearings are removed, they should be reinstalled. Should not be reinstalled. Lower main bearings. The lower main bearing inspection should be performed only when necessary for the element of the risk is involved when main bearings are disturbed. The lower main bearing should be inspected with the abnormal conditions observed with the engine shuts for the contamination of lube oil due to dilution of the fuel with the water, presence of the foreign material of the lube oil, filter screens, and engine oil pan. Lower main bearings should not be inspected with the routine service should be renewed with the internal oils of the scheduled maintenance program inspection samples unless evidence presenting calling with the other action inspection. Main bearings should be limited with the following selected low bearings with the experience has shown in the most critical figure 7-1 main bearing number location 8, 2, and 4, 12, 6, 2, and 6, and 16, 2, 6, and 9, 20, 2, 5, and 8, and 11. All lower main bearings are to be renewed if any of the lower bearings are disqualified at one of the selected bearing locations indicated above. At any of the additional locations inspected of the reason the following numbered paragraph to give an example of the condition requiring renewal of all lower bearings. Any with the bearing showing evidence overheat with the overheating condition result of the flowing of the overlay discolorization exposed bronze over the upper bearing of the renewed from the corresponding lower bearing shelf showed the evidence of the overheat. One bearing showed the milky white color on the overlay with the evidence of the extremely thin overlay with indicates water contamination, and one bearing has an area of the water exposed with the bronze of the 1/8 of an inch or more running along the edge of the tube of the more bearing halves exposed bronze. The lead tin overlay with the bearings must be present with the adequate safety margin against temporary marginal lubrication. Correct corrosive conditions exposed the bronze and heal with the dirt causes those in fact the bearing operation exposed bearing bronze due to the wear does not cover the bearings to lose protection against temporary marginal lubrication. For exposed bronze, due to the isolated with the abnormal wear of the overflaking, serving the fretting of the long with the mist, the mating edge of the upper of the lower bearing with the corresponding upper bearing should be renewed at any location exhibiting in the serve of the fretting of the bearing of the cap of the serrations in spec of the possible damage. Serve of the dirt with scratches of the dirt impregnation result in the abrasive surface. Caution: do not impregnation of the scratch of the evidence of the bearing oil is not properly filtered. The filtration system should be checked with the scheduled pressure of the mounting of the oil filter condition established. A visual inspection made with the dropping of the main bearing with the bearing and it is low enough to make the inspection without removing the cap of the shell of the bearing with the cap. With the removal of the resuable main bearing from the cap may result in improper reseating. Bearing removal of the wall of the possibility of replacing the bearing reverse side poor position at the wrong general location. Either the condition can lead to failure. In addition, removal of the cap from the studs involved with the risk of the damage, dropping the risk of the replacing cap backwards. Reusable bearing inadvertently with removed from the cap during the inspection. Performing the following: determine the previous bearing position by matching with the wear patterns of the cap board with the back of the bearing. If this is not done, with the new bearing should be installed. This is the only case where the lower main bearing may be renewed independently. When the previous portion of the determined marks with the mud pocket that identify with the right or left bank side, thoroughly clean the bearing back cap board. Remove any of the raised material with the unfretted areas, high spots may distort the bearing and cause premature failure. Thoroughly clean the cap and the A-frame serrations before assembly. Removal and application. Lower main bearings are to be removed with the bearing of the new bearing installed with the cap before the caps of the are reapplied with the recommended practice. Install with the new bearings with the part number of the accessory ends of the engine main bearing cap application. Removal of the tool available for the removal and application of main bearing caps. All main bearings except for number 5 on the 8-cylinder and number 7 on the 12-cylinder, number 5 and 6 on the 16-cylinder engine, and number 6 and 7 on the 20-cylinder engine. Figure 6-1 are removed, inserting the upper bearing shell removably with the journal oil passage, rotating the crankshaft the opposite with the normal direction rotation. Upper main bearings of the journal without the oil holes which are fretted or welded to the A-frame board can be removed by using the bearing and the remove tool. New upper bearings are fitted by hand between the crankshaft and the seal board with the bearings that cannot be hand fitted with the remove must be found corrected. The engine should maybe have to remove the crankcase remanufactured supply main bearing sheet. See the instruction of the installation of the crankshaft. Special procedure: overheated bearings. Overheating conditions connected is detected. Lower main bearings are to be renewed. Upper new main bearings are to be renewed only if the overheating location. In addition, with a routine cleaning up of the main bearing caps, the A-frame serration before the following. Measuring the main bearing cap seriation spacing for the seriation gauge of the gauge is close more than 20,000 of an inch. The nominal dial of the indicator on gauge set to 0 with the master bar engine should be removed with the crankcase. The remanufactured new upper main bearings cannot be fitted between the crankshaft and the seal bore. Reason for the be found with the correctly the engine may have to be removed with the crankcase remanufactured. Crankcase inspection must be provided satisfactory new bearings installed with the form and let feel over the check over the brake run with the main bearing cap should be lowered in on the studs at the location overheat was detected. A bearing inspection made. Bearing inspection should be repeated overheated location at the end of the month of the operation, end of the 3 months of the operation. Thrust color. This color description: the two thrust colors, figure 6.5 of the solid bronze and the semicircular in shape of the one face of each of the color of the thumb printed oil depression with it to ensure the adequate with the lubrication plate with the counter bore of each of the center bearing airframe are held in position by the bearing cap for the purpose of limited with the longitudinal movement of the crankshaft. Figure 6.5 shows the crankshaft thrust collars, thumbprint oil depressions, and 2 halves of each of the engine thruster for the lubricate with the main bearing linkage off oil with the install of the thumbprint oil, the depression away from the A-frame in which they are placed. Maintenance thrust collars are exceeding the clearance limit should be replaced. Gear type torsional damper description. Gear type damper figure 6.6 of the hydraulic paddle wheel device that absorbs torsional vibration with the crankshaft with the forcing of the engine lubrication oil through the narrow passage with the damper. The damper consists of the spider with the external spur teeth, with the internal intermediate ring with an internal spur teeth with the 2 outer sides of the plate with a skid with the bolts and nut with the continuous circulation of the oil provided with the damper through the oil passage within the crankshaft. Oil flows through the chamber, the stem of the damper through the radial holes, beginning with the spider hub, with the ending with the fillet radius at the base of each of the tool with the passage of the dam and the narrow spaces with the spider hub, with the provide with the oil-free flow of the restriction of the spider so designed that each of the tool is directed supply with oil auxiliary circumferential oil groove is machined into each side of the spider supply with the oil over the rubbing surface between the spider and outer plate. These grooves are supplied by the means of the number of means of passage connecting with the groove with the radial holes, intermediate ring with the ground with both sides of the uniform thickness, slightly thicker than the spider. So you'd have your figure 6.6 show the gear type damper, show the intermediate ring, the spider, and the rear plate and the front plate. Okay, so the difference with the provide with the axle clearance with the domestic with the proper oil passion additions with the clearance between the intermediate ring with the spider provide with the allow ring flow over the oil film with the generator with the tips of the spider teeth with the form, the vent hole with the drill with the rim with the intermediate ring to relieve the oil pressure readjusting of the ring with the central control position become with the display for the hole with the equally spaced around the ring are normally covered with the tip of the spider teeth. However, the oil is permitted to vent with the intermediate with the ring between because of the display with the spider teeth no longer cover the hole thereby reducing the pressure with the higher the pressure of the opposite edge side of each tooth that prevail with the restore of the intermediate ring is to the correct position. The design is to prevent sudden bumping of the teeth with the two identical outside plates are secured with the intermediate ring means of the arrow bolts interface of the plates adjacent with the spider are covered with the oil flows with the cleaning of the between and the spider with the outer plate with the drain with the crankcase. Alright, your maintenance damper required no maintenance other than the inspection of the time and no more overhaul. However, the damper should be checked with the free of the movement intervals specified with the applicable scheduled maintenance program. The check for the performed by the removing the rear handhold cover the rotating the damper 10 degrees each direction pressing against the inner plate. If the damper cannot be moved, it should be removed and disassembled. So there's your front plate, intermediate ring, spider, and rear plate. Okay. Or disassembly. Scrub line across the outer plate with the intermediate with the ring of the outer plate with the mark. Also mark the relation of the spider outer plate with the marks of the user with the reassemble the unit with the user. Figure 1/8 inch thin wall socket the remove with a 3/4 inch bolt washer nut for the damper. Using 5/16 of an inch thin wall socket to remove the 5/8 of an inch bolt with a washer from the nut from the damper to remove the front plate with the intermediate ring and the spider from the rear plate with the inspection. Inspect the 4 vent hole with the intermediate ring with a sludge with the other obstruction. Remove the debris with the wire with the thin melting rod. Clean oil holes of the spider with the wire with the thin metal with the rod. Clear all components with the fuel oil with examine all surface excessive scratching and scoring. Assembly plate for the front over the pad plate with the stamp serial number of the pillar part with the number of the facing down. Plate of liberal coating with the engine oil with all contact surfaces between the spider and intermediate ring with the inner and outer plates. Place spider on the front plate with the stamp front facing down. Align the scribe marks on the spider line of the front plate, and place the intermediate ring of the front of the internal teeth mesh with the feet with the spider scribe mark with the ring on the line with the front of the plate. Our piston on the rear plate with the intermediate ring aligned with the scribe mark with the Texaco thread X number 2303 with the thread 5/8 inch body bolts with install of the body bolts and washer 5/8 inch in the rear plate, intermediate ring and front plate. Install 5/8 inch washer nuts and torque the 150 foot-pounds of torque applied with the thread X number 2303. Threads of the threads of 9 3/4 inch bolts with the install of the bolts with the washer for the remaining hole for the rear plate with the screw with the washer and nuts torque to 240 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, installation. Install the damper crankshaft with the side spire with the stamp with the front facing away from the engine. 0 stamped above the mounting holes is to be applied with the number 1 crank pin. Apply with the Texaco thread number 2303 mounting bolt threads. Install the 8 mounting bolts. Thread washers, torque, and specified value. Accessory drive gear train. Description: accessory drive gear train, figure 6-7. If it is located with the front of the engine, provides power with the crankshaft, with the drive of the oil pump, with the water pump, with the governor, with the gear train consists of the accessory drive gear with the scavenging oil pump gear with the main loop oil pump gear, the right hand, left hand water pump gear for the governor and drive gear. Maintenance: using complete engine disassembly being with the undertaking of the unlikely to the entire of the gear train would be removed the engine at one time. The water of the pump, oil pump, the governor drive can be assembly removed the gear train as individual units. The remove the accessory drive gear from the governor with the drive gear requires removal and realignment of the accessory driver housing. And this shows your accessory drive gear train. You'd have your water pump gear, your governor drive gear, governor spline, flange, water main lube, oil piston gear pump, and then water pump gear, governor drive gear, governor spline flange, main lube, oil piston cooling pump and gear, accessory drive gear, scavenging oil pump. Alright, accessory for the drive gear. For the description: the coil spring with the design of the accessory of the drive gear, figure 6A with the dam for the transmission crankshaft with the torsional vibration accessory drive gear train. Accessory drive gear is meshed directly provided with the drive with the lube oil scavenging pump with the main oil, lube oil. Piston cooling oil pump maintenance for the accessory drive gear should be removed with the inspection at the time of the complete. The engine overall of the accessory drive gear require very little maintenance. Inspection intervals should be disassembled with the inspection of the parts. Parts should be the obvious damage should be replaced. Removal of the following: removal of the procedures applied with the gears mounted with the standard crankshaft with the gears mounted with the bolts on the subshaft. So you'd have your accessory drive gear exploded view with the bolts, oil slinger, disc, spring segments, and coil springs, and then hubs, and then disc. Your standard crankshaft, remove the 4 accessory drive gear mounting bolts with the hardened washer. Secure the gear with the crankshaft. Remove the oil slinger. Remove the crank gear from the crankshaft bolt-on. Warning: accessory drive gear mounting bolts secure with the bolt on the stub shaft with the crankshaft prior to removal of the mounting bolts with the apply the blocking secure gear. Secure gear of the stub shaft with the holding device. Remove the 4 oil slinger mounting bolts with remove the oil slinger from the gear. Remove the 6 spline with the head mounting bolts with the hardened washer. Securing gear, stub shaft, crankshaft. 3. Remove the gear in the subshaft from the crankshaft. Bolt-on subshaft with identification groove. The note with the current configuration of the subshaft, the 1/8 of an inch wide groove with the face of the small end of the taper. Subshaft is mounted with the crankshaft within 2 1/2 13 threaded unit retention bolts, which allow the removal of the application with the accessory drive gear with the crankshaft damper. The removing the subshaft from the crankshaft. 1. Removing the 4 oil slinger mounting bolts with remove the oil slinger from the gear. Remove the 6 spline with the heading and the mounting bolts with a hard washer securing the gear. The subshaft. 3. Remove the gear from the subshaft. The gear should be inspected for the rough, the screw, the surface of the gear teeth, of the magnet flux. Inspect with the wear in excess of the maximum limit that occurs on the drive side with the whole gear should be reversed to the serial. The number side of the gear is placed adjacent to the oil slinger of the original installation. Identify the drive side of the gear is reversed. The original serial number should be ground off with the re-stamped on the outside. Opposite side. The maximum bore diameter permissible is provided with the hub of the gear. The clearance does not exceed the maximum limit of the bore. May be chrome plated to the ground of the new dimension. Your hub in having a 7.4975 inches diameter may be used in the maximal hub gear clearance is not exceeded. The disc may be reused using provided spring segment. It does not exceed maximum diameter or otherwise in good condition. Your spring segments should be marked in prior to disassembly and relative position of the gear. Where should be checked with the right hand segment of the half of the view at 12 o'clock position where the segment of the contact with the gear of the board with the drive of the gear. Where the if the wear of the point exceed for the maximum limit of the segment half, it should be replaced with the reassembling of the spring seat with the relocating of the segment with originally with the drive side with the drive to the drive side and play for the replacement segment of the driving side of the gear. Springs may be reused providing reload exists. Exits assembly of the spring and segments into the gear. Phosphate treatment. It's recommended the gear hub and the disc of the segments be phosphated treated before reassembly. Before reassembling the drive gear, be sure all of the parts of the clean, lubricated, place in the slot disc on the bench of the place of slots facing down. Apply the gear over the disc, align the hole of the gear with the disc, place the oil, coil spring between the two segments of the tabs down with the assemble the press together the start into the gear with the drive assembly all the way down using a rawhide mill until the tabs enter the slot of the disc. Repeat the operation of the remaining spring assemblies after they are placed in place. Install the hub into the new gear board with the remaining of the spring assembly after they are in place. Install the hub into the gear board. Apply with the top of the disc, line up the dowel holes into the bolt of the disc, the hub, and then apply with the dowels. Snug with the dowels fit should be maintained by reaming, and if necessary, apply with the oversized dowels. A bolt nut should be used to clamp the assembly together until applied to a crankshaft. The installation following procedure: apply with the crankshaft mounted with the gear to the bolt on subshaft mounted gears. Crankshaft mounted. Install accessory drive gear on the crankshaft with all mounting holes in the crankshaft. Install the oil slinger line with the mounting bolts within the holes in the gear. Lubricate 4 mounting bolts with the Texaco Threadex. Number 2303. Install the bolts hardening of the washer torque of the specified value. Bolt on subshaft mounted. Place on the gear subshaft with the aligning mounting hole with the place of the gear and subshaft with the crankshaft align mounting hole with the subshaft with the crankshaft. Lubricate 6 blind head mounting bolts with the Texaco Threadex number 2303. Install the bolts hardened washing torque to specified value. Secure oil slinger to the gear. 4 mounting bolts with the torque 24 foot-pounds. Bolt on subshaft with the identification groove mounted. If the subshaft has not been installed, align the subshaft retention bolt holes with the holes in the crankshaft. Secure the subshaft to the crankshaft with 2 1.5 13 bolt torque specified value. Place gear of the subshaft with the line with the mounting holes. Lubricate the 6 blind with the head mounting bolts. With Texaco Threadex number 2303, install the bolts hard wash and torque on the specified value. Secure the oil slinger to the gear with the 4 mounting bolts torque at 24 foot-pounds. Governor drive gear and subshaft. Description: governor drive gear mounted with the governor drive subshaft, observing the main loop with the oil piston cooling pump gear. Governor drive the gears through the drive, right and left bank water pumps. Governor drive assembly maintenance. Governor drive gear subshaft require no maintenance or other inspection at the time of the normal overhaul. Alright, 6.9 shows your governor drive gear subshaft. You have your subshaft jowls, your gear and bushing retaining plate, and driving governor drive flange. Inspect the gear for the fatigue with indications of the crack, spits, other evidence of failure, and possible magnaflux inspection should be performed. Inspection of the gear with the bushing, subshaft, with the gouge, or other damages. Sure subshaft oil passage is not plugged. Installation: position the subshaft on the crankshaft with the oil on the left side. Secure the subshaft with the crankcase using 4 1.5 20 hex head drilled bolts. Do not torque bolts at the time. Apply governor drive gear assembly with the subshaft. Place the dummy main loop oil gear on the top of the accessory drive gear with a tube. Teeth matched to the accessory drive gear with the governor drive gear with the raised lower governor drive gear subshaft until the backlash governor driver main loop oil gear pump gear is in 16 thousandths to 33 thousandths of an inch. Since the dump oil pump gear is resting on the accessory drive gear with a zero backlash between the dummy gear and the governor drive gear is twice the normal requirement as 8 thousand, 16 thousand of an inch. Removal dummy gear and governor drive gear. Tighten governor drive subshaft to 75 foot-pounds of torque. Remove the 2 dowels of governor drive with the subshaft at 494 thousandths with a tapered ream and 4,998 thousandths plus an inch, plus or minus 210 thousandths of an inch before bottom reaming. Be sure using cutting oil. Alright, if the dowels over the governor drive shaft and the stub the shaft that do not align with the crankcase, the drill of the ream and the overside of the drill of the dowels as required to produce the full circumference fit. See parts of the catalog listing oversized dowels. Use any air hose to blow the chips oil out of the dowel holes. Insert 1/4 inch 28 bolts approximately 63 1/4 inch into the dowel pins. Place dowels and dowel holes in the subshaft. Drive into the crankcase end plate. Torque the dowel pin at 17 foot-pounds. Lock wire shaft, mounting bolts and dowels, bolts in groups of 3 or less. Apply gasket between the oil jumper and the oil pass stub sheet shaft and secure the oil stub oil line and subshaft using 2 3/8 of an inch 24 hex head drilled bolts and torque to 35 foot-pounds of torque lock wire and mounting bolts. Apply governor drive gear to the subshaft. Install retainer plate. Secure the subshaft using 3/8 of an inch 24 hex headed torque bolts and 35 foot-pounds of torque. Or your lock wire retainer plate mounting bolts supplied with the governor drive plane with the governor drive and secured with the 6 3/8 inch 24 hex headed drilled bolts torqued at 35 foot pounds of torque. Lock wire flange bolts, 2 groups of 3 bolts each. All right, your accessory drive housing and application align with the following procedure provided with the proper aligning with the accessory drive housing, accessory drive application, the governor drive assembly for subsequent application of the water loop hole pumps, applying steel compound to accessory drive with the housing mounting flange, apply gaskets, placing mounting bolts on the washers in the housing mounting holes, using a holding fixture with a suitable with lifting device position hose housing to the crankcase and secure the mounting bolt on each side of the housing, remove the holding fixture from the housing hardening. Hand tighten all the mounting bolts. Add left-hand water pump alignment gauge to the left of the pump opening in the housing so that the gear teeth mesh for the governor drive gear in 611. Apply right-hand water pump alignment gauge to file 762. Right pump opening of the housing to the gear with the gauge gear teeth match for the governor driver gear. Apply oil pump alignment gauge so that the main oil pump opening and housing so that the gear teeth match for the accessory drive gear. Same gauge used to align the housing with the governor drive gear. Apply another oil pump and alignment gauge file with a 763 to the scavenging oil pump opening the housing so the gauge gear, teeth, mush, and accessory drive gear. 10. Position jacking tool figure file 759 over the end of the accessory drive shaft until the adjusting nuts are in line with accessory drive opening figure 611. Remove the vertical adjusting nuts in effect with the gauge reading of the governor driver gear. Accessory driver gear are taken by oil alignment gauge applied with the main loop oil pumping opening. Shows the accessory drive housing holding fixture. This accessory drive housing position figure 610. And then figure 611 shows the accessory drive housing gauge jack foot. Alright, moving to the horizontal adjusting nuts of the affect with the gauge reading, accessory drive with the gear with the take of the alignment with the gauge applied with the scavenging oil pump open. Insert the spline with the end of the jack tool file 760 with the spline with the governor driver gear flange until the adjusting nuts are aligned with the governor drive opening. Adjust the nuts should be in horizontal position 611 the mounting. Movement of the adjusting of the nuts effect with the gauge reading of the governor. The drive gears are taken over the alignment of the gauge mounted with the water pump openings. Adjust the both jacking tool with all 4 gauges and indicate the 8,000 to 16,000 inch clearance of the gauge gears and the engine mounted gears. Disengage the gear alignment gauge mounted with the main loop oil pump opening from the accessory drive gear. Rotate approximately 180 degrees within the mesh for the governor drive gear. Recheck all gauge indications at 8,000 to 16,000 with the clearance. Tighten 4 mounting bolts, preferably 1 at each side and 1 at the top and bottom. Remove the both jacking tools from the housing. Check the alignment gauge if the indications are between 8,000 and 16,000. Tight remaining housing bolts to 65 foot-pounds of torque. And then your ring gear and coupling disc flywheel. Description: ring gear figure 612 with the U of the engines. Equipped with the starting motor's engine with the teeth of the ring of the gears. Rotate with the crankshaft of the engine starting with the select of the crankshaft position with using the engine turning gear device. The ring gear pilots to the engine side of the coupling disc is bolted with the coupling disc. The coupling disc serves as the coupling between the engine crankshaft and the drive shaft with the degree with the top of the end dead center mounted stamps on the outer rim of the coupling disc. Holes are provided around the circumference of the ring rim. Insertion of the turning bar of the manual rotate the crankshaft. Maintenance: inspecting the engine coupling disc for cracks and damaged surfaces of the all. Inspecting the coupling disc to the crankshaft bolt holes with elongation. Fretting of the bolt hole head mating surface. The surface of the fret of the area may be spotted up face to 1/16 of an inch depth as long as the minimum disc thickness is maintained. See service data limit for limits. Engine to the generator coupling disc should be requalified whenever the engine and generator assembly is removed. Maximum trouble performance for the engine generator coupling can be best ensured with a careful magnetic particle inspection both discs and prior to the reuse. The inspection is particularly important, known as the coupling. The coupling has been subjected to unusual stress. Figure 612 shows ring gear and coupling disc installation, crankshaft, coupling disc on an 8 to 12, and then 12, 16 ring gear, crankshaft, coupling disc. And then your 20 finger of the ring and the crankshaft and the coupling disc. Alright, engine coupling disc, the same type of the interchangeable to provide the top dead center point or location engine is the same. The serrated coupling of the symbol, the use of the body bound bolts. For this reason, it has no rimmed holes. All rim bolts are the same side of the coupling disc. Should be applied with the crankshaft with a small O-ring marks of the coupling disc. And the crankshaft coincide with this full mark. The position with the pointer at 0 degrees marked on the rim with the number 1 piston top dead center. Apply Texaco thread number 2303 to the engine coupling bolt to the tighten the bolts to the torque of 1,800 foot-pounds of torque, 8 and 12 16 cylinder engines to 1,350 pounds, and 20 cylinder engines tighten the rim uniformly to avoid cocking with the coupling of the seriation torque value of 295 foot-pounds. The gap between the coupling halves after the rim bolts should not be less than minimum after the rim bolts have been properly torqued. Caution: the coupling bolts must be applied with the chamfered side of the head placed adjacent with a crankshaft fillet. Face run out and rim eccentricity should be checked with after installation of the coupling disc to the crankshaft with the crankshaft position to avoid thrust interference. Eccentricity to the rim outside diameter run onto the rim face should not be exceed the maximum indicator reading listed in service data. Or your accessory drive coupling. The accessory drive coupling is assembled in figure 613, bolted key with a tapered front end. Camshaft provide power taken off the connection components drive from the front. Figure 613 shows the accessory drive coupling. With the engine, some application of the coupling is bolted with a tapered stamp stub shaft. Maintenance accessory drive coupling does not require any of the routine maintenance. However, the replacement of the rubber center bounded joints may be required and desired. See applicable maintenance instruction for replacement of the rubber joints. For your coupling, the coupling has been removed. The essential for the proper application procedure is to avoid severe damage to the crankshaft with either driven unit of the engine. The prior mounting of the coupling of the crankshaft with the subshaft. Inspect the two tapered surfaces. Ensure the mating surfaces are free of the nicks, burrs, and aluminum oxide cloth with 180 J grit to clean the tapered surfaces with the crankshaft key slot. Hand fit the 2.5-inch key so that to tight the engine crankshaft key slot. Tape the key to the slot of the end of the key with the flush with the end of the crankshaft. Note, if the key slides in the keyway, scrap the key. Fitting the couple of flange on the shaft to make sure that the keys remain flush at the end of the shaft. Lubricate the threads on the retaining bolt with the bolt side of the washer of the Texaco thread extender retaining bolt at 100 foot-pounds of torque. Attach dial indicator with the coupling with the button on the indicator with the accessory housing on one side with the top studs of the coupling seal 0 the indicator. Torque the retaining bolt at 500 foot-pounds of torque. Record the advanced measure of the nearest thousand to obtain reading with the limits given in the surface that is usually caused by imperfections found on one of the tampered surfaces or within the keyway. These surfaces should be free of all nicks and burrs. Install the lock spring, lock washer, 1/2 20 thread bolt to the head of the retaining bolt and torque the 260 foot-pounds of torque. With the dial indicator button reset resting on the outside of the diameter coupling flange, record the TIR on the rim to be sure that the data does not exceed the limits of given in the service data. And this is the service data for the crankshaft accessory drive gears, and then that continues with the equipment list and your files. And this was section 6, crankshaft assembly accessory drive gear train. For the electric motor division, manual division 645 engine. Testing.